Welcome to the show, Dr. Richards. It's wonderful to have you here, and we're so excited to learn from you about this huge arc of experience that you've had in this world of psychedelic research. We thought we would start by asking you a question about, can you tell us a little bit about what was the environment like? What was the attitude like back in the late 50s, early 60s as you got started around the hope for psychedelic compounds?
Yeah, well, it was early 60s, 1963 to be precise. And at that time, I was a graduate student in Germany. And the model psychosis view was dominant. The psychiatrist in Göttingen, Hans Karl Leuner, had just written a book called The Experimental Psychose, The Experimental Psychoses. And it was about how most people, given psychedelics, had kind of confused, paranoid type symptoms. And there was a thought that this would help us understand schizophrenia better. But there was no appreciation for supportive setting. It was just giving a drug and leaving people alone and seeing what happens,
Wow.
And in his book, there's about a third of a page labeled mystisches Erlebnis, cosmic mystical experiences. And he just notes that every now and then this rare type of experience happens. And he mentions it just for the sake of comprehensiveness,
Wow.
Be a good scholar. And when I volunteered in his clinic, I became one of these interesting characters, this strange American student who had the mystical experience. And so I participated really eventually in the recognition of setting in the German research. But that was a long time ago.
So it sounds like the launch pad here, which I didn't totally know, in the early 60s was actually about trying to understand psychotic processes and not so much about using LSD as a mechanism to help people uncover unconscious material get better. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the research going on in Saskatchewan in using LSD and alcoholism, and it started off with the idea that the LSD caused a model psychosis like delirium tremens that might scare people into being healthier.
Wow.
But it was gradual even there that they realized that there's something profoundly healing and therapeutic in some of these transcendental states. And if you're adequately prepared and guided, supported, it doesn't have to be a nightmare at all. It can be an incredibly meaningful, helpful experience.
Now, in the early 60s, did the mainstream culture know about LSD yet?
They did in the United States. I didn't. When I first received psilocybin in the German clinic, all I knew was that there was this new drug that was supposed to help you remember things from early childhood. Mm-hmm. And I was expecting to get some insight into my Oedipal complex, maybe, But I had no idea that it could trigger profound, awesome, meaningful, spiritual types of experiences. Mm-hmm. So I was one surprised kid. I didn't even know the word psychedelic at that time. Aldous Huxley had coined it, was it in a letter to Huxley or from Huxley? I forget, but anyway, the word had just been coined 7 years earlier. for mind manifesting, and I had yet to hear it. I had no idea what psilocybin was. So at the end of that first experience, I said, "What was that drug you gave me? How do you spell it?" And the rest of my life, in many ways, has been footnotes to that experience.
Wow. So how did you get? Now you were a graduate student in Germany,
right?
And it sounds like you weren't going into that program with the idea of getting interested in psychedelic research or
right. Not at all. Actually, I went there as the second of 3 years in a Master of Divinity program at Yale. And I thought I was going to study theology or maybe be a minister. It was just an interesting opportunity that I thought I'd check out. I was recording my dreams in those days, and I thought that it might give me some new insight, but had no idea that I was moving in the direction of research and teaching in the psychology of religion, And so I came back from Germany with a very sharpened sense of a vocational direction, But I went there to study theology.
Yeah.
And because of the structure of the German university, you can sit in on lectures anywhere. So I could sit in on psychiatry classes as well as theology classes. And it was in the School of Medicine, actually, that I found the experiential dimension of religion. And in the world of theology, it was often kind of pedantic quibbling about the meaning of Hebrew words or whatever. That just did not excite me.
Kind of boring.
Theology doesn't have to be that dull, but it can be, Yeah.
I can imagine why the experiential contact with the mystery could be more compelling than a didactic experience.
Yeah, well, not only that, there were a series of experiences there, but even the first one alone gave me an appreciation for the incredible beauty and mystery, if you will, and intelligence of the human psyche. It also, even then, I think I could feel some differences in how I experienced myself. I was more what Maslow would call inner directed, less a puppet of cultural forces, what I should think, what I should do, and more a sense of my decisions coming from within me. I think I became more spontaneous, maybe a little more playful, more willing to take some risks in deep human relationships, just more at home in the universe, basically, And that came out of a few minutes of a 4-hour psilocybin session,
Wow.
Pretty awesome.
And very awesome. And it sounds like that 4 minutes of a 4-hour session has really stuck with you over decades.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that awareness has been refreshed now and then by other psychedelic sessions or spontaneous experiences with meditation or music performance or whatever,
Right.
But there's no doubt within me that there is this sacred creative dimension of consciousness. And I think there's reason to believe it's in every human being.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of depressed people just don't know that it's there. They don't know what they're capable of. They don't know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Or in religious language, they're estranged from themselves or from the deeper resources that are in them, just waiting for connections, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you feel like, because you've been researching in the psychedelic space for, 60 years now almost, or?
It's getting close to that, yeah.
It's getting close to 60 years. So you're basically in there as long as anyone at this point, basically, right?
I guess I'm one of the lucky survivors.
You are. What do you feel like in all these years of research? Where do you, I mean, we have this exciting psychedelic research renaissance going on right now. And what are you most excited about the applications of psychedelics for? Because you've got a great vantage point on it.
Yeah. Well, there are many applications, in medicine, and I think also ultimately in education and religion, What excites me personally most, there's only 24 hours in a day, on this planet. What are you going to do with them, And my choice, I think, is probably to focus on the integration of psilocybin into palliative care. For example, there is a oncology center in Rockville that's just ready to open a new essentially mental health division of their building, and it's going to offer psilocybin therapy, in a research context. And to me, that's incredibly exciting, and who knows how that will build if it all goes well. It's not inconceivable that many oncology centers may want to offer psilocybin therapy in a few years. And so that takes me into how do we train all these therapists to staff those places and so on. But that changes our whole attitude of how we live fully until we die. There's so many people approaching death with cancer or whatever who are just kind of lying in bed being depressed, instead of living fully. And it doesn't have to be that way,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very fond of that application, if you will. But treating of addictions, treating of depression, post-traumatic stress, we're just starting to look into how it may impact early Alzheimer's disease, things like that. Eating disorders, it's those studies are just beginning, but they seem to be, the psychedelic therapy seems to be very potent for a lot of different conditions. Basically, it's not reliant on our DSM nomenclature, but it speaks to human beings who are estranged from their own inner resources. And it helps us wake up and come alive when it's used intelligently and skillfully,
Right. And that's a key phrase.
That's right. Yeah, it's so much more than just throwing a drug in your mouth and seeing what happens.
Right. Right.
That's why I'm so happy about in your ketamine work, Will, that it's in a matrix of psychotherapy. I think that makes all the difference. Yeah.
It's so important. Yeah. And so it sounds like what I'm hearing is a kind of almost like a unified cause across multiple, let's say, expressions or different colors of fruit on the tree of mental health challenge. This estrangement from the deep self, or the capital S self, or the spiritual self.
Yeah, and it looks like it's really there. And good old skeptics and agnostics, if anything, find it more easily than some people with entrenched belief systems. If you can go into a session with psilocybin, certainly, or any of the major psychedelics, with a sense of security and openness, choosing to trust, that you're in an interpersonal matrix, in a confidential space, you feel respected, you don't have to prove anything, you can just be yourself. And then you can choose to dive over backwards into the unknown waters.
Right.
And welcome whatever emerges, pleasant or unpleasant. There's
Yes.
nothing to fear then.
Yeah.
And in that intention, these drugs are just not only incredibly safe, but incredibly healing. I don't think the drug does the healing. The drug gives the opportunity. It kind of gives you access to these other states of consciousness. And then it's how you respond to that opportunity depends on who you are and who you're with and your preparation, and maybe a little instruction on how to navigate in the internal world,
Yes.
That if something scary comes up, you don't run away from it, but you go right towards it. You dive into the pupil of the eye of the monster. You don't run from the monster. But you have to know that. Someone has to tell you that in advance.
Right.
Or you say, yikes, the monster, let me out of here.
Yeah. I'm really curious about the conversation here that we're going toward now, which is the monsters. And, obviously there's still a lot of stigmatization around bad trips and the painful material that can come up on psychedelics. And, I have my own history with psychedelics, and I'm sort of one that would have definitely benefited from only doing it with a trained facilitator because of the amount of complex trauma that overwhelmed me every time I took one. Mm-hmm. What I'm curious about from all of your experience all these years is sometimes these states that become extremely overwhelming on psychedelics, that I believe they're material that we can actually do something about on psychedelics. But I'm curious, from your perspective now, is it simply that just having the guide there is enough to deal with if it's a very big overwhelm, or sometimes maybe the dose was too high, or just what's your kind of current understanding of when people get in a real pickle on psychedelics and are seriously overwhelmed?
Boy, that's a big topic. Let me start to unpack it. Having a guide present, trusting the guide, feeling safe, allows you to be courageous, to allow the dissolution of your everyday sense of self, the ego. Whether you actually need the guide during the period of drug action or not. Sometimes the guide is simply a presence in the room. And if you need it, he or she is immediately there, But if you don't, you're well prepared in advance and it's okay. But when there's this, it's not an accomplishment of the ego, that I'm going to trust and allow anything to happen. Because when you get to this ego transcendence, ego dissolution, whatever you want to call it, stage in human consciousness, all the ego can do is choose to receive, to accept, to allow experiences to happen. You can't be in control anymore. you're getting beyond language. You can't even put it into words, often. So the secret is this courageous act of trust, really, and that's enhanced by being in a safe place in a good relationship. What else? I think there is such a thing as too high a dose. That's just kind of when the door is open wide, it doesn't open any wider. And I think sometimes you can just get into confused places that aren't really helpful. I think the ideal session is where there's a sense of complete transcendence, a kind of a unitive state of consciousness, and then a gradual return to the everyday world. So you start interrelating the two worlds, my everyday life and my relationships, and the insights of truth and beauty and goodness and love and forgiveness and all that are in these transcendental states. So you bring the treasures back to earth, I think that's the best of all possible sessions.
It sounds like that bringing back is sort of the beginning of integration of the transcendental and the mundane.
Right. Or that's what we call, what does the enlightened man do? He chops wood and carries water, after the ecstasy, the laundry, like somehow you come back, but you come back inspired, centered, reborn in some ways, perhaps more courageous, more willing to address conflicts in your past or in your present relationships that you thought were hopeless,
Yeah.
And there's a sense of empowerment there. And even playfulness, after you've confronted a few monsters and kind of tamed them, if you will, that the Greek dragon or boogeyman kind of becomes your drunk father in the middle of the night, and that's all it is, or whatever. It starts to be fun. You start going around the basement looking for monsters,
It's your appetite.
It's like the old knight on horseback, looking for the dragons to engage, instead of fearing them.
Yes.
Another big piece is that a lot of what gets labeled bad trips are really potent therapeutic opportunities, getting into unresolved grief and guilt and reliving traumas from childhood. It's not fun. It may be emotionally very exhausting, painful, scary. And yet, when you go in and through those experiences, you arrive at something beyond it, of reconciliation and healing and insight. And that's what makes us so powerful, that unlike the SSRIs, basically, we're basically trying to turn off the symptoms of distress and just, cope, hopefully with a little joy and pain, but not too much, but not really getting at the sources of the depression or whatever, the addiction, the feeling that I just got to get away from life because it's too overwhelming.
Right.
This form of therapy enables you to go in and through that distress and tap into inner resources you never knew were there. Or in the language of AA or NA, you find the so-called higher power, and it's really there. It's not abstract intellectual concept. It's a vibrant reality. You know?
It's a lived experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When I finished my psychiatry training in early 2000s and started applying the tools that I had learned, the SSRIs and cognitive behavioral therapy and these kinds of approaches, I got to a point of despair within a couple of years of doing that had me quitting psychiatry and going and looking for deeper answers. And that eventually is what led to getting involved in MDMA research and starting this institute with Keith and really looking for those root causes.
Yeah.
And trying to help people to actually face these root causes. That's where I think the psychedelics are so incredible as an opportunity.
I also like to think if this field keeps expanding and developing as it looks like it is, it could give a whole sense of rebirth to the profession of psychiatry. I mean, there will always be some people who just want the pain to be covered up and give me an SSRI, you know? I just want to cope better. I don't want to understand it, you know?
Right.
You know, but I don't think the drug companies are going to go out of business. There'll still be demand for them. But for those who are so motivated, it opens up such a beautiful meaning. It's like giving, I hesitate to use the word soul because I'm not sure what it means, but it's like giving psychiatry back its soul. Mm-hmm. You know, that the human mind is this incredibly wonderful, beautiful thing, you know, yes. Creative, playful, inventive, and aesthetically beautiful when you explore it with a psychedelic often, you know.
Right.
Even the monsters are pretty incredible. And also it gives back to psychiatry and mental health in general an appreciation for the power of really therapeutic alliances, really good human relationships. That when I like to use the word interpersonal grounding, that like grounding an electric circuit. And when you're grounded in a good relationship, your mind can open up and work with things and go through things that it can't do if you're just trying to doctor the biochemical soup in your brain, you know?
Right.
And there's something beautiful about human relationships. And let's let psychiatrists enjoy them again, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this idea of being licensed as a psychiatrist without ever studying psychotherapy and not knowing what an archetype is, that's really kind of a sad place, you know, and the human mind is so much more than that, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious, flipping now to what you're already leaning into, which is we go away from the monsters and into the gods, and taking the conversation there for a moment of so I had an experience on MDMA when I was 21. I had severe social phobia and anxiety, and it probably got about 80% better in 3 hours on MDMA and never came back.
Someday you'll be able to do a podcast.
Exactly.
Right. If only I knew. And what I recall from that experience, so and among others at the time, but you know, there was sort of this window into the loving connection that was always present between myself and everyone else, and that there was a tangible feeling of some kind of force like gravity that my best understanding was love. And just experiencing that in that window, in that moment, changed my life around social phobia, which I mean, it's kind of amazing, right? And I'm curious, from all of your experiences, and what you've seen in other people, like what are some of the more amazing little snapshots of stories you've seen like that, of just these openings that last a lifetime sometimes?
Countless stories. Let me give you one example, actually, from my wife, the mother of my children, who died several decades ago. But when she was a child in Germany in 1936, she experienced the bombing of Germany, of Dortmund. Very frightened, traumatized experience, being in front of the bunker with her father while people were literally being killed around her, And early in our marriage, she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Whenever she heard a fire engine, it was always an air raid siren, and she'd get frightened, And she suffered from depression, like, is it right to bring human beings into this suffering world,
Wow.
Maybe we shouldn't have children,
Mm-hmm.
Well, when she and I moved from Boston to Baltimore to do psychedelic research, she was a psychiatric nurse. And in those days, in order to do psychedelic research, you had to have 2 LSD sessions. It was on-the-job training, and you got paid for it, And so she had 2 training sessions at Spring Grove Hospital to prepare her for working with alcoholics and hospitalized, depressed people and so on with LSD. And it totally wiped out her depression and her post-traumatic stress,
Wow.
So much that one of our cancer patients turned out, where she and I were working as a dyad, this man turned out to literally have been a 19-year-old kid dropping bombs on Dortmund.
Wow.
And now he was a 49-year-old terminal cancer patient, And just seeing their interaction, different period of history, different time, different issues, but loving, caring, respecting, forgiving, Like, that's the type of thing that gets triggered with this. I mean, she helped him die in a very supportive way,
Wow.
So, I've just witnessed so much in so many people, so many cancer patients who felt hopeless and in pain and complaining, who experienced decreases in pain, openness to interpersonal relationships. One woman literally got out of bed and danced at her daughter's wedding. Sounds like old testimonials, But doggone it, it's really inspiring. One wonderful thing about the cancer work is that it empowers the terminally ill person to almost become the social worker for the family, that they can open up the difficult topics, instead of avoiding and feeling helpless. And it makes it possible often to live very fully right up to the last breath. And
Wow.
you finally say, well, I'm out of here, guys, so long. But it doesn't have to have all the drama and despair that dying usually has in our culture.
Yeah. It sounds like a real balancing is possible with the support of psilocybin in the dying process, of the support for the balancing the story of that this is only loss or this is only a negative experience.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
Another just while my mind flows there, to insert it into your podcast to inspire some psychiatrist researchers out there. Another application of this therapy that is still waiting to be seriously explored is working with prisoners and people with sociopathic tendencies. Really, our country has more people locked up than any. It's a huge industry, warehousing people,
The prison industrial complex.
Yeah. And so many of those people, I think, if you could build a trusting relationship and help them experience some of these transcendental states, it would provide a sense of ethics, if you will, feeling loved, and a capacity for forgiveness, a sense of interconnectedness with humanity, of belonging instead of being estranged, of working through neglect in childhood that many of them have suffered. And it could enable them to contribute to society instead of being warehoused making license plates, And what a change in perspective that would be.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that is. I'm so glad you said that and spoke to it. Obviously, we need to completely reform our punitive system and move it into an educational system, which is really what you're speaking to. I mean, psychedelics is sort of a 10-year education in a few hours sometimes.
Maybe 20 years.
Maybe, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only for mental health people and prisoners, but for philosophers and writers and physicists. And, there are discoveries to be made in these other states of consciousness that are profoundly educational, if you will. If you really want to understand Dante's Divine Comedy, or you really want to understand Plato, why not experience the states that they appear to have been writing out of, Or Abe Maslow, who never took psychedelics, but had spontaneous transcendental experiences. When you have one of these experiences, you know exactly where he's coming from, Yeah,
it's interesting because my early experiences with psychedelics 25 years ago now, it was sort of a remembering for me. And I think I've heard other people speak about it that way, sort of like, it's almost like the experience is on the tip of my tongue, but can't quite touch it. And then it happens. And it's just like, oh, I always knew this existed. Do you know what I'm speaking about?
I think so.
Yeah, where it's kind of like this window opens into a transcendental state, and it feels like a returning rather than necessarily something that just happened for the first time.
Yeah, cancer patients often talk about it as homecoming. That it's not only a state of consciousness after death, but it's a state of consciousness before birth. And as our Zen Buddhist friends say, it's also in the middle of the present moment, if you can get there. In the living body with the heart beating and the lungs breathing, you can still wake up to this state. It's always there. And we call it eternity or infinity, but it's part of the human repertoire. And it's there waiting to be discovered, and it's in the core of all the great religious traditions of the world religions,
Right.
It's people have stumbled upon it either spontaneously or through meditative techniques or whatever, and written about it and put it into scriptures, and there it is,
Well, Well, and speaking of stumbling into it, do you feel that there are certain, let's say, techniques or psychotherapy approaches that seem to be more fitting or more effective as a guide in supporting people to touch the transcendental state?
Definitely I'm very involved in the California Institute of Integral Studies and with Compass Pathways and USONA Institute, so on, in how do we train effective therapists, what's important and what isn't,
Right.
And above all, it's the ability to very rapidly establish a deep bond of trust and openness with an incredible variety of human beings, different occupations and races and educational levels and whatever, but to kind of it's the being of the therapist that matters more than the collection of techniques you have in your back pocket, And some techniques come in handy now and then, but it's basically establishing this intuitive sense of safety. And then to be able to appreciate the different states of consciousness, that there's no such thing as kind of the psychedelic experience, unquote, but there are all kinds of different levels of experiencing within the realm of the ego and beyond the realm of the ego. And to kind of honor those and have an intuitive appreciation of them and not be afraid that the person is getting psychotic and you ought to wonder about where the rescue medications are, to be at home, to honor those different inner worlds, and to be able to teach turning off the intellect, to just kind of collect experiences instead of having to label them while they're happening and try to understand them. They are so far beyond the limits of human language and our current ability to understand, if you will. So the counsel is just collect the experiences, dive into them, let them happen, and then we'll think about them after the drug wears off.
Right.
But to be willing to relinquish that defense mechanism of intellectualization is incredibly important. And also to affirm the intent to welcome everything that emerges, to trust the wisdom. I like to use the word, the choreography of your psyche. That there's something within that knows with incredible wisdom how to present the material that needs to be healed and understood. And if you're willing to just dive in, and if it's beautiful, fine. If it's ugly, fine. If it's exciting, fine. If it's boring, fine. To just go in and through one experience, and then in and through the next experience, and in and through the next experience. And if the roller coaster gets a little too high, you reach out and hold the hand of your guide, But the intent is to welcome. And the faith really is that if something comes to you, it's an invitation to cope with it and work with it. And this is a hypothesis, but it's borne out well in my 50 years, that if there's any trauma within that you're just totally incapable of dealing with, I don't think it will even appear, And if it appears, it's an invitation to work with it, So you don't have to be afraid of releasing too much too soon,
Right.
If the relationship is solid, bring it on,
I like that. And Well, I'm curious along the trauma discussion. There's a lot of emphasis in trauma therapy without psychedelics of, tracking the person and seeing whether they're dissociating or present, and sort of trying to just track their overall state so that if they're too dissociated, they're going to get flooded, and if they're more present, you can process the material. I'm curious, when we look at trauma that arises during a psychedelic experience, do we just sort of let the medicine do its work with the person and not worry about, is this person here or dissociated, or is it really just a different landscape?
Yeah. I think that's our need as therapists, to talk about what's happening or to try to guide it and control it. It's kind of like doing the work in slow motion, but in a high dose psilocybin session, it's happening in fast motion, faster than you can talk, faster than you can think. And if the relationship is solid, there's nothing to fear. That doesn't mean it's simple. And sometimes people need 2 or 3 sessions instead of 1, but they don't need 20 years of taking Prozac.
I'm curious, as you gain, as you have gained so many years of experience, and you kind of have this, at least from my point of view, you have the capacity to have this perspective about the community of, where we're going in psychedelic research. What is your biggest concern, if you have one, about where things could, so to speak, go wrong, or where we could go down a less effective path? Or you've mentioned a few times training therapists, and obviously that's something that you're very committed to, trying to make sure there are enough therapists available.
And competent therapists.
Competent therapists. Yeah. Are there other concerns or?
I think it's very important within the psychedelic research community, which is expanding incredibly rapidly internationally. I mean, I can't keep track of all the research projects going on anymore. Clinicaltrials.gov list 44 when I looked a couple days ago.
Wow.
It's really exciting. But there's a lot going on, and I think we need to support one another in the community, stay in very good communication, and not be too quick to judge. There's some tendency of a few people to kind of divide the world into angels and demons. I love the Escher mandala painting, you may know, of angels and demons. There's these very pious, innocent angels and these very devilish demons, but together they make up a beautiful pattern, and I think there's an angel and a demon in most of us,
Absolutely.
And we need to guide, police, communicate within the psychedelic research community, but also not condemn and devalue the contributions that any one researcher may make. We're all capable of poor judgment now and then. That's why we need one another.
Right.
But that doesn't cancel out the contributions that people have made and continue to make.
Right.
So it's important. We're approaching some kind of certification, licensure, of that where you say, I am a certified psychedelic therapist, That doesn't mean you can't go to someone who's not, but someone clearly has the formal training and supervision and continuing education that increases the probability that that's going to be a safe person to work with, Mm-hmm. And if we're going to hire someone in our research operation, we might want to hire those people who are certified because we know that they've got a background, not just in good intentions and a little psychopharmacology, but they've been present in a few sessions and they've watched a lot of videos and they've talked about their ideas with others. And they have the basic empathic tools to be effective,
I'm really thrilled that certification program is being planned out because I think it's exactly what you were just saying about relying on each other as a community to establish a kind of benchmark or a kind of expectation. And
right.
It's a way of keeping people safe, I think, and ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to encounter these milestones or these challenges, which are also opportunities.
And also to integrate this therapy into our culture where it is now. If you get too far out, you frighten the horses. you gotta, when you're dealing with the FDA, you have to speak respectfully in a language that the FDA understands,
Yeah.
Or you don't get anywhere, And there's some voices out there who want to reform all our political systems yesterday, And that's youthful enthusiasm, I think. I kind of admire it, but I don't think it's going to work. We got to work very patiently, very respectfully, very gradually. There's a huge educational job we have to do in the population as a whole, as well as in the mental health community,
Absolutely.
And one step at a time, folks,
Yeah. Speaking of education, that kind of takes us to our final question that we'd love to invite you to respond to, however you wish to. We ask every guest this final question on the podcast, which is, if you had a message on a billboard that everyone could see, with a paragraph on it, what would you say? What would you like to say?
Oh, I'd have to think about that a good bit. Might have different messages for different billboards, but I think it would be be yourself and keep waking up. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You're not the only one that said keep waking up.
Don't underestimate the contributions you can make to the world and the meaning you can find in your own life, And in that framework, the psychedelics, like meditative procedures, are valuable tools that some people may choose to use in the process. They're not for everyone, but for those who are so inclined, I think the day is coming when we can use them responsibly and intelligently, and they can enrich life. That they're really for most people, the psychedelics are very safe psychologically, and certainly we know they're safe physically. They're kind of non-addictive, essentially non-toxic. And people who have good experiences often don't want to take them again for quite a while. They've got a lot to digest. So it's not likely to become a drug of abuse, but more a drug of gradually waking up and developing as human beings. Yeah.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure to get to have this conversation with you, Bill. And I just want to thank you personally for the contributions you've made to opening up healing pathways for all kinds of different suffering in the world. Thank you.
Well, it takes one to know one, Will. Thank you. Onward.
Onward together. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Thank
that
you.
was a great conversation, and I also really respect what you've done. And it was great to chat with you and kind of get in there.
Good. Likewise. Stop by when you're in town.
Absolutely. Thank you.